Now we can probably just go ahead and move into the panel, right? I think. So if that's okay with... oh, John just disappeared. But if we can just invite Chris. Yes, excellent. And we also have our dear Harris. Harris, can I hear you? No, I cannot hear you yet. But it's been first of all, thank you so much to all of you for the incredible... and Harris is back here. Thank you so much for the incredible presentations and for bringing us up to speed of what's happening from very different perspectives. That makes me very, very happy to see that there is a lot of stuff happening in the accessibility space. Maybe just before we start, I just want to kind of get your opinions on things. Where do you think we are in terms of accessibility today? Still a long way ahead of us? Have we made some incredible progress already? Do you think that we are at a point now where accessibility is already established, or is it still something that we need to fight for? Like, where do you think we are at the moment? Maybe we can start with Christopher?
Sure, and thanks again for having me here. I think the answer is all of the above. It is definitely a lot farther than we have been before. I think we are still at a place, depending on the organization, depending on the leader, where you still have to fight for it. But I think what we have passed is the point where nobody knows what it is. I no longer have to explain. I rarely have to explain what accessibility is. When I'm talking with technologists, when I'm talking with people building technology, out of the real world, they may not understand. But when talking to the people who are making technology, we understand what it is. And I think I need to credit our friends at Microsoft, because I think with their Xbox Adaptive Controller, they sort of blew up the conversation of accessibility in a very public way. They built, the biggest company in the world built a piece of technology for people with disabilities. They had a Super Bowl ad, and they convinced Logitech to build the cheapest set of switches you're ever going to get that, with such a high quality. They changed the conversation. Now it's up to the rest of us to be able to take that momentum and drive it forward. And I think they gave us that opportunity, and it's really exciting watching technology evolve with this mentality that it should be built for everyone. So I'm positive about where it's going, but I still think there's lots of work to go.
Excellent. All right. Also, dear friends, by the way, just in case, please keep in mind that I'm monitoring the chat, so please feel free to drop in your questions in the chat. I'm kind of keeping them very close here. Harris, are we good in terms of tooling? Apparently not. What do we need to make things a little bit better?
Well, yeah, there's a lot of room to grow. I do just want to touch on the last question. I think that from a developer's perspective, accessibility is more accessible, meaning that there's, extremely huge community behind it. It's easier to find resources now than it ever has been. And yeah, of course, we still got work to do. And then to answer your question with tooling, I hope that not necessarily that we become more reliant on it, but I hope that tooling can save us some time and make accessibility more accessible, meaning more companies can adopt stuff. More people have the ability to make a solid business case for accessibility, because I know that's obviously a huge barrier in most people's cases. But honestly, I think tying into the last question, the community's grown so much that I think more companies than ever have accessibility champions. So getting accessibility tooling into more dev teams' hands is only going to help. Of course, you can cheat the system, make an inaccessible site. But maybe you use a tool like an intelligent guided test to actually weed out those issues that the automation can't find to begin with. And I think like it's great to try to use robots where we can, but I think it's naive to think that we're going to be in a position where you can just click a button and magically everything's accessible and you get to walk away. So our human brains are still vital here in accessibility testing. We're still valuable.
Right, absolutely. All right, Manuel, do we have an answer to that statement?
So the positive thing that I see is that more and more conferences and meetups and so on, events like these feature accessibility. I think that has changed a lot in the last few years. So you usually see at least one accessibility talk, even at events where you wouldn't expect it. So, for example, I gave a talk at React Finland about web accessibility, which is really cool that they invited me and they wanted to learn about web accessibility. So That has changed. So I would say that more people know, or more developers and designers know what web accessibility is. But at the same time, I'm running HTML, and the concept of the site, or the original concept, was I take really bad code that I find on websites, on real websites, and I analyze it, and I tell you what's bad about it, and I provide better solutions. Of course, without blaming anyone, so I remove all the traces that would point to a specific source. And I can tell you that most websites aren't in good shape. And so there's still a lot of work to do in terms of just the basics like HTML.
Yeah, absolutely. It's also quite interesting because when we look at the tooling, it's been very interesting to see Google's Aurora effort to improve web performance out of the box, which was essentially just an attempt, or is an attempt rather, I would say, to really just bring in performance to main frameworks, be it Angular, be it React, and so on and so forth. I mean, looking at the libraries and frameworks and tooling that many of us are using or relying to when we're building our applications or websites today, is it maybe a good idea to just move towards that space and say, let's try to do, whatever people are using today, just accessible out of the box? Like, can we do something there? For example, even, frankly, I don't know about the state of things, but if I look at Tailwind, let's say, can we have Tailwind just accessible out of the box and that's it? Because given the scope and the size of people, the community using it, right? So, and other frameworks as well, is it an approach that we should be taking? Or is it just too opinionated to just target frameworks that might disappear in a year or two? Anybody wants to take this one?
I can start. I think the adoption of an accessible framework is a great first step, because you don't want to have to build everything from scratch, but it still takes intent to make something accessible. You still need to develop and test with people. As Harris had said, you need to have a human in the middle to make sure that these things are actually doing what you expect it to do. So it's sort of garbage in, garbage out. You might have a great structure, a great framework, but without actually making sure that you're doing the right things with it, without making sure that you're adding the correct tags, you're adding the right descriptions, you could have a great looking house that sort of falls apart when you blow on it.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's really kind of this idea, in fact, that if if you take an accordion that is accessible, then you plug it in another environment, and then everything will be accessible. That's not necessarily the case, right? You can actually break accessibility very easily. So it kind of needs that knowledge, those skills to be available there. Harris, do you think like that when we're looking again in this space of tooling at this point, are we at the point where, okay, let me maybe rephrase it a little bit. I'm also working with companies where they do want to push for accessibility, but very often it's becoming the thing like, how do we then make it work within the larger scope of the system that we have? Because you have very different departments, very different things, and it's very easy to break things, to break accessibility, because just one department did something wrong and then off it goes, right? How can we kind of get away from this fragility? Is there any way to build robust accessible applications? How would you even approach that?
It's tough and extremely common with large organizations. But I think one thing I tried to touch on, and I always try to mention because I see the exact opposite happening most of the time. I'll work with like another company, is the concept of shifting left. So if everybody is committed and dedicated to accessibility, and that comes from like literally the ideation phase of a new feature, a new product, a new page, whatever it is. If the people, the managers are already thinking about accessibility and the designers are, and that information is conveyed to the developers, and you have proper tooling around that, like meaning you can't push any code until you pass some automation, which of course is going to cover everything. You can't actually merge any pull requests until someone's actually performed an assessment on that content. I mean, that's a great way to create kind of accessibility in a sustainable fashion. But of course, no one's perfect. Even DQ accidentally ships bugs that can be accessibility bugs or otherwise. But as long as you kind of treat those the same and you're thinking about accessibility from the start, that works wonders. And I've seen it. Like if the designers, even just that one thing, if designers start annotating the expected roles and thinking about color contrast, that ends up trickling into production a lot faster than you'd realize. So, and a lot of times people are starting late, so it can seem daunting, but I think just starting to chip away at that legacy content, assessing it and fixing those issues. I think people will be pleasantly surprised at how easy a lot of those issues are to fix. Some are more complicated than others, obviously.
That's a very interesting bridge to another thing that I wanted to kind of bring up as well here, because who should be owning accessibility in organizations, small and large? So Manuel, you're working for the government of Vienna, for the city of Vienna, right? So how is it organized there? What is the process like? Obviously, when it comes to government, especially government websites, accessibility is the priority, right? So can you maybe just shed some light into how do features get deployed? Who is owning accessibility? Is it kind of distributed between designers and developers, or who are the accessibility champions, except, of course, you?
That question is really hard to answer, and I can't answer that for all the products. Of course, I would say that all departments and all companies working for the city are trying to build accessible products. I can just describe how it works how it worked with our relaunch, for example. The site isn't online yet, but we are in course of a relaunch, and it was pretty much just like Harris described it, how it should be. So we considered accessibility from the very beginning, even before we wrote the briefing for the design agency who did the design. And they implemented the things that we told them in an accessible way. And if they didn't, we just told them to fix it. And we explained why. And so there was a process of learning involved, which is pretty great because we can share our knowledge and they're able to make our products and our components and so on better. And then it, in this case, went to me, and I tried to make them accessible, the things that they designed. And in a very early phase, I was using X a lot, and X Devtools and Lighthouse, of course, just to catch all those low-hanging fruits that the others were talking earlier about. And yes, and if I, and that this also happens, have to check other sites others have built, accessibility is one of the top priorities, just like performance, for example. We care a lot about performance and we care a lot about accessibility. And if I get my hands on a website that isn't accessible, I will write a nice email and explain what's wrong about it. And I will provide them with resources and explanations why they should be fixed, and ideally also which impact this has. And then these things get fixed, and then hopefully an accessible site gets shipped. But what I wanted to say at the very beginning is the workflow isn't perfect, not even for a governmental or a public organization like ours, but we try to make things as accessible as possible and to make workflows as good as possible. And one of the things that we are trying to, because we have some inaccessible sites, it's just the way it is, because not all things are built by us. And one of the ways we are trying to fix this is, again, providing knowledge. So we didn't just build a new design system and a pattern library, but also we are explaining why certain things should be the way they are. And we also provide developers with some learning material.
Mm-hmm.
Can I interject here with a question for both Harris and Manuel? What do you think about the responsibility of platforms like the Google Chromes and the Edges and the browsers and platforms? What are our responsibilities? Because not everyone's going to care. Not everyone's going to do this. Do you think there's more that the platform should do? And if so, where does that line draw until it becomes, we don't want to have an accessibility kind of thing, that the browser will just take care of everything. So where do you think that should go? That
is such a tricky question for me, because I think in some senses the ship has sailed. Like HTML and modern browsers are the most forgiving imaginable. You can open up a head tag, put your main in there, and it somehow usually works it out. Previously, early on in my career, it would enter what we call quirks mode, the browser, and then things would be very unpredictable. But it's hard for me to say, because like you said, there's a limit where it might become intrusive. It might actually start excluding content from existing at all. And maybe there's some vital information inside of a completely inaccessible app that really would save someone's life or otherwise. So I don't want to say you should just drop the hammer and say, if you're not passing whatever checks that you build into your user agent, you shouldn't be able to render a page at all. But I think Chrome's done some great things, and other browsers have done the same. Building tools to make it easier to find issues or easier to immediately see the color contrast of a foreground and background color are great. I think some browsers even, if you have the verbosity on your logs up to verbose, it'll actually spit out some console errors for you for things that are either invalid HTML or could be accessibility issues. But yeah, I mean, in an ideal world, yeah, you wouldn't be allowed to put inaccessible content on the internet. But I think at a certain point that would start limiting more than it would help. So yeah, it's tough. I think just giving people more tools and more access to things that will help them make more accessible content. Authors need to know what they're doing wrong. A lot of times people don't know that they're making these mistakes. And I think it's easy for us in the accessibility realm to get caught up in that and laugh at people who don't know better. Look at this div class button, ha ha ha. But I think if platforms tell that author, hey, you should be using this instead of that's a good start. And I think in reality, that's about as good as we're going to get, and just keep progressing.
Yeah, just to throw it in here for Manuel as well to answer. That's a very good point, Christopher, that I actually had on my list as well to bring up, because I was thinking about core web vitals, including performance, right, as a main one of the core web vitals key factors to kind of assess the quality of a page and how well it's built and so on. And I think for maybe last year there was a conversation about adding accessibility as one of the web vitals as well, to be able to rank websites higher that are accessible. That maybe will bring us to maybe that's something that we should be kind of exploring a bit more. But also, Manuel, from your perspective, is there anything else that we could or need to be, to have on the platform that is desperately missing?
I think the things that Harris said are really, really important and really true. And recently I talked to Chris Heilman from Microsoft and Edge, and he said that we talked about an article that I wrote about Devtools and some accessibility features, some of the features that Harris mentioned. And he said that we are trying to move accessibility to where developers are, because I was writing about some very advanced stuff that only like accessibility experts use, like checking the role and comparing some ARIA states and stuff like that. And he said that we are trying to move some of the accessibility features to where the majority of developers are. And an example is, I really like that in Edge, and I would like to see that in other browsers. If you open DevTools and you open the Elements panel, and there are issues in your HTML, for example, if you have an image tag and the alt attribute is missing, it will show a squiggly yellow line, just like you made a typo somewhere. And if you hover it, it says, hey, your image is missing an alt attribute. And it uses X behind the scenes and webhint.io and another resource that I forgot to find these issues. And I think this is one important thing, to not just hide accessibility behind a panel somewhere in DevTools, but move it to the front, similar to what Chrome and Firefox did with the color picker and stuff like that. Or if you hover an element, the tooltip doesn't just show what kind of element you're focusing or hovering, it also shows the role or the color contrast. So this is, we should get these features closer to developers. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Christopher, what about you? You asked the question, but I didn't answer it.
I think there's an interesting balance between what you want a platform to do, but I think what was interesting to me is I use the platform slightly different than Harris and Manuel have. I think about the web browser, how, for example, Google Chrome can provide machine learning based alt tags for the situations where it's missing, or it can provide captions when it's missing. There's an opportunity, and I think there's something that more work needs to be happening here, where the browser can provide more, I don't know, lowest common denominator solutions. Is it better to have something that is computer generated than nothing? That's not for me to decide. And I think we need to provide options and let people decide for themselves. But there's more technology being invented all the time that could help these situations where people are doing nothing. But then again, the right thing is to make it easier for people to do something, because the easier it is, the more likely people are going to do it. So I don't have an answer.
Yeah, that's a very good point. And thank you so much for bringing this up as well. Maybe let's just have 3 more questions from the audience, and then we'll slowly wrap up as well. One question is coming from, actually, it came during Manuel's talk, to be honest. Is it prudent in a web design when developing requests for proposals to specify Lighthouse score 100% is required before the website is published? If not, what specific language would you recommend in the RFP regarding accessibility? Well, that's a very specific question. Manuel, we want to take this one?
Usually the way it works, at least with the websites that I deal with for the city of Vienna or also in my freelance work, is that the website has to be WCAG 2.1 AA conforming. This is even more than just passing the Lighthouse test. I wouldn't add a tool like Lighthouse to a paper like this, because sometimes there are just, X is trying to, there shouldn't be any false positive, but sometimes there are just things that you can skip. So sometimes I will get a warning for, low contrast, and it might be below the 4.4, but if it works for my users, it's fine. It's not a perfect score. It's not 0 errors. But if I test it with users and it works for the users, if the contrast is in reality not too low, then I can ignore these numbers. So I'm not sure if you would want to put something like that into a paper like that. But you could do it. I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah. All right.
Yeah. I guess it makes more sense to use the WCAG, the Web Accessibility Guidelines for that, and to use this as a baseline.
All right, reasonable. A very common question that always comes up, and I still have to bring it up, and maybe you will have some useful insights in there. In my experience, it's very hard to fight with designers. I feel like I'm fighting all the time for more accessible websites, colors, links, outline, buttons, focus, inline error messages, and so on. How do you get around this? They make it look nice, but it's really rarely accessible. It's just about education, right? So anybody wants to kind of take it on this? Where would you,
I can take it.
Do next? Yeah, go ahead, go.
Yeah, I think, like I said before, this is so common. Like the whole, I design everything, don't get any input from anyone else, and I throw it over a fence and go la 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 while they implement it. Bad. So, collaboration is always great. You should probably, as a designer, be working with your accessibility experts and probably your dev team for that matter, for more than just accessibility reasons, but for accessibility reasons, that's obviously great. But I think designers inherently are usually very focused on the interface, of course, but also the experience, the UX aspect. So I think when something's inaccessible, it's bad for usability as well. Obviously inherently it is, but also there's a lot of overlap there. So I think if you drive home the point that this is creating a terrible experience, this is a broken flow, maybe even speak their language. Designers think in states and flows. If you bring up the point that, yeah, these are branding colors, but it's preventing, X% of your colorblind users from really understanding what's going on. I think that will drive home the point in their language better than you might with a technical explanation saying, oh, it needs to be 4.5 to 1 technically to be compliant. If you use their jargon, I think it's better at being persuasive there. So I would say try to get yourself, if you're not the designer, and or an accessibility expert in the room while they're presenting designs, or you maybe have a design review, and bring up those problems from the start before it's already implemented and shipped to production, and the business doesn't want to spend any more money on it.
Mm-hmm.
Also, what I believe is important is the way this question is phrased. It can be very hard to fight with designers. Don't fight with them, because if you start that way, if you say, no, this sucks, you have to do it this and that, and add focus types and the font size is too large, it's of course you're getting into a fight, and that's not a nice way to start a conversation. And what I learned is that most developers and designers, they're not ignorant, but they just don't
You're a nice human being, Manuel, I must say. That's a good point, indeed. All right, maybe just the final one from Karis behind the scenes. And that's a wonderful one for Christopher to answer, I think. That's a difficult one, though. I think this is like the crown, I think, at this point. Which problem would you like to be able to solve, but you can't because it's tech not making it possible yet? Wow. Okay, I'm just going to repeat that. Christopher, I think that you're muted, by the way. Which problem would you like to be able to solve in accessibility, but you can't because the tech is not making it possible yet? I mean, you can also, Harris or Manuel, you can also pick it up first as well if you want to. It wasn't me, it was Karis who posted it, so it's like, I'm not taking the blame for you. No, I'm just kidding. That's a very good question. Maybe I can answer maybe before I'm gonna hand it over to you. I think for me, the critical part that I would love to be able to solve, but I feel like I'm always struggling with it, is really to create an alignment within teams. I think that everybody is just moving to different departments. Everybody is moving somewhere, running somewhere all the time, and having very different goals. And they have very valid goals on their own, but they do not fit within the global scope of things. I would love things like accessibility, usability, performance be just an established default out of the box, just a default that everybody confirms to. And because I honestly believe that this is the default, that I would love this to be the default on the web, because you cannot create a great experience if it's not usable, if it's not accessible, or if it's not fast. Right? There are obviously many other moving parts there as well, security being one of them, privacy being the other, right? But I just would love us to have this shared understanding that this is the thing that we all want and we all care and we all want to push forward, right? That is something that I'm missing at the moment.
Okay, I guess I you gave me a chance to think. I appreciate that. I think I would love to be able to solve the problem that people don't know or don't care. And I think the tech does not exist to understand the intent of all content. So the day where you have some kind of machine learning algorithm that could take a look at any page and make it accessible to anyone in any format that they wanted it. I don't know how that would work. I don't know how it would work well, but that is something I would love to be able to solve, that the tech doesn't exist yet.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I think building on that, I'd like to see a vast improvement in, just to kind of touch on what we said, we were hoping platforms would be able to do. I think, things like Manuel said about meeting developers where they're at. And I think that should stretch across not to just developers, to designers too, but having stuff like I use linters for all sorts of things. Like when I'm writing my TypeScript, it says, "Oh, you're doing something that's not going to compile." We're starting to see improvements there for accessibility specific things. So before you even launch the code or render the code in the browser, it might start yelling at you for more low hanging fruit, of course. And I'd like to see that improve. But I think beyond that, it would be cool to get more design tools embedded with things that will enable designers to at least ensure that what they're creating is accessible from a design perspective. And same thing goes with maybe marketing folks. Maybe platforms like HubSpot can make it easier to ensure that the PDFs that they're shipping out are accessible. So I'd like to see that just not only improve from a developer front, but also just everywhere else, every other profession that's creating digital content, just having more tools that make it easier to determine if what you're creating is accessible.
All right. Final words from Manuel. the words of wisdom.
I can
from
just
Hell?
I just agree. There's nothing more I can add to that.
That's excellent as well. All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. So it's been my pleasure, Christopher Harris and Manuel, to welcome you. And I think it's wonderful that we kind of got together, albeit virtually. But it was incredible talks, incredible presentations, and wonderful insights as well. And thank you so much for being here. Dear friends joining us from all the wondrous parts of the world, please go ahead and send a little clap emoji to the entire crew. Wonderful speakers joining us today and sharing their insights with us. I don't even know, I'm running out of emoji here. Let's go for dumpling. Everybody likes dumplings?
Yes.
Manuel is very much accepting dumplings.
Pierogi.
So please,
Ooh,
pierogi as
even
well.
better.
Excellent. So please send a round of dumplings emoji, and thank you so much for being here with us today.